Ein was born as a worthless appraiser, and it has led to a life of constant misery. He can barely make a living for himself and is constantly mistreated by those around him. So now that he's on the edge of death's door, he decides to take the plunge and get it over with. A few hours earlier, Ein was in a party with the mage Jolene and the swordsman Zoid. He is currently up against your average New York City rat, and he manages to slash it, but it's not enough to take the rat down, so he yells for Jolene to hurry up with her spell, and once she's finally done, she fires it at the rat, killing it in a single blow. Now that they are done with their battle, Zoid and Jolene begin praising each other for a job well done. However, they are nowhere near as nice when speaking to the appraiser they brought along with them, Ian. Zoid yells for Ein to hurry up and do his job already, but all the heavy baggage he's carrying combined with the weight of their insults makes it difficult to move, so Ein ends up falling face first to the ground. He is clearly being mistreated, but even so he has no choice but to get up and obediently do his job as a low-common appraiser. At birth, all the people in this world are granted jobs by the goddess of light and skills by the goddess of darkness. By honing these skills, one can gain a multitude of abilities and powers. However, jobs are passed down genetically, so they can never be changed. These jobs are divided into tiers: rare, high common, and low common. And as you can see, low common is bronze tier trash, so most people with this class are stuck as peasants or merchants. Ein's parents used to own a small appraisal shop to support the family, but they both tragically died when Ein was young, so he was left to fend for himself. That's how he ended up becoming an unglorified pack mule for these two, and even though he hates working for them, he's got no choice. He uses his appraisal skill on the rat they killed and finds out that it's an F-rank rat, so it's pretty much worthless. Although its tooth is D-rank, so it's valuable enough for Ein to pick up. He tries to pry the rat's mouth open so he can remove the tooth, but that jaw isn't budging, so this is going to take a while. Zoid and Jolene are starting to get impatient since Ein is taking so long, so Ein asks them for a little help so he can get the rat's mouth open quickly. However, Zoid is offended that Ein would even dare to ask for help, so he throws a rock at him and tells Ein that he's worthless. Ein glares at Zoid with rage in his eyes for what he just did, but unfortunately, Ein doesn't have the strength to back that rage, so Zoid just kicks him across the floor and Ein is forced to apologize and beg for mercy. Zoid doesn't feel like beating Ein up anymore, so he gets back to work trying to pry the rat's jaws open, while Jolene and Zoid mock him for being a filthy trash collector. They really enjoyed making fun of him, and they know he can't do anything about it since there aren't any jobs for an appraiser like him. If someone wanted to figure out the value of an item, they could easily go to the guild and have it appraised with a magic item, so low-level appraisers like Ein are totally obsolete. Ein heard everything those two just said about him, and he knows they are right. His appraisal skill is practically worthless, so the only job he can get is scavenging parts for jerks like Jolene and Zoid. As soon as Ein has stored the tooth in his bag, Zoid reminds Ein that the only reason they even agree to have him in their party is because Zoid hates touching gross stuff like that, so he had better learn his place and behave like a good trash boy. Life dealt Ein a bad hand, but he's got to do whatever it takes to survive in this world, even if it means he must suffer at the hands of those two. As they are walking through the dungeon, Zoid happens to spot a hellhound corpse lying in the middle of the path, and he doesn't even question it. He thinks this is incredibly lucky since they can loot it without him having to fight, so he orders Ein to start looting. However, Ein has a functioning brain and raises the good point that if the hellhound was already dead before they got here, then something strong must have killed it. And on top of that, hellhounds aren't even supposed to spawn in this area of the dungeon, so he is sure something is seriously wrong here. However, Zoid doesn't want to hear any logical arguments from a loser like Ein, so he tells him to shut up and get to work already. While Ein does the dirty work, Jolene and Zoid begin talking about getting freaky with each other once they get back to town and maybe forcing Ein to watch. But then they notice a second hellhound corpse in the corridor, so they tell Ein to go get that one too. However, this time, Ein is frozen in fear because according to the guild map he got, there shouldn't be a corridor here, so he has a bad feeling that something is going to go wrong if they keep going. Yet once again, Zoid completely ignores Ein's logical arguments and starts walking into the corridor. He tells Ein that if he's so scared to continue, then he can leave on his own, but he won't be getting paid anymore since he is disobeying an order from the leader. Ein is pretty much cornered here because on one hand, he knows something dangerous might be down in that corridor, so he really doesn't want to go, but he also can't afford to be fired from Zoid's party. There are practically no other parties that would be willing to accept a loser with a skill like appraisal, so if Zoid kicks Ein out because of this, he will have no way of surviving. So Ein eventually decides to head into the corridor with Zoid even though he knows it's a bad idea. After walking through the corridor for a while, they come across a ton of dead hellhounds on the floor, and Zoid thinks they just hit the jackpot since they can loot all these bodies and make a massive profit without having to fight anything, but Ein is still uneasy since whatever killed all these hellhounds might still be around. Zoid is getting sick of all Ein's constant worrying, so he yells at him to shut up and do his job. But then Ein sees something absolutely terrifying behind Zoid, so he nervously points in that direction. Zoid turns around to see dozens of little red eyes staring at them, and a few moments later, a pack of hellhounds emerges from the darkness. All those hellhound bodies they found earlier must have been the result of infighting among the pack, but now that they've been confronted by the full pack, none of them know what to do. Ein has no combat skills, and even if Zoid and Jolene worked together, they would barely be able to take down one hellhound, let alone an entire pack, so fighting isn't an option here. The only way they can make it out of this alive is if they make a run for it, but even if they do try to run away, there's no way they can escape a pack of wolves chasing them down. Just then, Zoid realizes that he and Jolene don't necessarily have to be faster than the hounds, they just have to be faster than Ein, so the hounds eat him first, so he tells Jolene to cast a paralysis spell on him. Jolene is confused at first, but she soon figures out what Zoid is trying to do, so she points her staff at Ein and paralyzes him. Ein falls to the floor, unable to move, and he can't believe that the two of them really plan to leave him here to die. But Zoid assures him that the paralysis only lasts for a short time, so if Ein stays quiet, he might get lucky and escape the hellhounds as well. However, Zoid then proceeds to make a lot of noise to attract the hellhounds straight to Ein, and afterwards he runs off with Jolene, leaving Ein to be eaten. The hellhounds pounce on Ein and immediately bite into his arm and leg, so he screams out in pain. But all the pain from being mauled caused the paralysis to wear off, so Ein can once again move and grabs a nearby rock to get the hellhounds off him. He then throws his backpack at them, and while it may not have done any damage, the food inside the backpack was enough of a distraction to buy him some time, so he slowly limps away from the hounds. But unfortunately, he discovers that Zoid and Jolene had blocked off the exit, so there really is no way for him to escape. He doesn't have much time before the hounds come after him again, so Ein spots another corridor and starts heading straight for it. But to his dismay, this corridor leads to a massive dead end. All hope seems to have been lost for Ein since he has nowhere to run and he can hear the dogs closing in on him by the second. If he is going to die regardless, Ein would rather fall to his death than be eaten alive by those monsters. Till now, he has always blamed his failures on his trash appraisal job, but now he realizes he never actually tried to overcome the challenges he faced because of his job. But even if he realizes that now, it's too late for him to change anything. A loud thud is heard as Ein's body hits the ground, but while he most certainly died on impact, he happened to land right on top of a tree. A beautiful girl appears before him and slowly walks towards his dead body before giving him a kiss on the forehead. As she does this, Ein's body begins to move again, and after a few moments he regains consciousness. Once Ein can think clearly again, he realizes that he's still alive and all his injuries have been healed, so he starts wondering how that could even be possible. He notices drops of water falling on him from the tree, so he catches a few and uses his appraised skill to check them, and to his utter shock, these are S-rank droplets of the world tree. He then appraises the giant tree, and sure enough, he discovers that this huge hunk of wood is indeed the world tree of legend. Long ago, this world had a single world tree, and this tree was responsible for producing the mana that humans use to create magic. However, the legend also states that the world tree withered away and died long ago, but many scholars of the world theorize that it must still exist somewhere in the world, which is why massive expeditions were launched in hopes of finding it. But the tree was never found, although it makes sense why no one ever found it, because who would think to search at the bottom of the dungeon? He realizes that the tree must have brought him back to life, so he thanks it, and as he does so, he hears a girl's voice, but there's clearly no one else here, so it must have been his imagination. Moving on, Ein is glad he survived the fall, and this place seems pretty safe since there are no monsters here, but he needs to think about how he's going to get himself back to the surface. Zoid and Jolene obviously aren't going to call anyone to save Ein, plus there's no food here, so he will starve if he doesn't make it back home soon. He heads for the exit, but before he leaves, he once again thanks the tree for saving him. This place obviously isn't on the guild map, so Ein has no idea what to expect from this place. The enemies here are bound to be stronger than those hellhounds that nearly killed him, so he's scared, but he has no choice but to go. He's done making excuses for himself and plans to do whatever it takes to survive, no matter how hard it may be. Ein walks out into the dungeon, but to his surprise, he's been walking for a while now, and there are still no signs of any monsters. He's honestly relieved since that means he won't have to fight, but suddenly Ein feels a gust of wind near his face, and in the next moment, his ear is on the floor. He screams out in pain and tries reaching for his severed ear, but in the process, 2 of his fingers get cut off. The one behind Ein's suffering is this S-rank gremlin, and Ein is starting to really panic since even those hellhounds were only B-rank, so he stands no chance against this thing. The gremlin begins slicing Ein up, and it's way too fast for Ein to even react, so his only choice is to flee. However, as he attempts to get away, the gremlin raises its scythe to stab Ein through the chest, but before it does, it freezes in its tracks because something even more terrifying just appeared. The gremlin gets squished to death by a massive death bear, and if Ein didn't stand a chance against the gremlin, then he most certainly isn't surviving the death bear. The bear slashes Ein's face with its claws, destroying one of his eyes in the process, and while Ein is trying to crawl away, it picks him up and begins squeezing until blood gushes out of his mouth. The death bear was just about to eat him, but at the last second, it gets decapitated by a grumpy woman. She hates the fact that she just saved a human, but that girl kept begging her to help him, so she didn't have much of a choice. And he is once again shocked to find that his wounds have been healed, and as he sits up, he sees that girl from before sitting across from him. Ein is still trying to wrap his head around what he's seeing, but then a woman appears behind him and demands that Ein show proper gratitude and drink the tea that the girl made for him. Ein is confused since he hasn't seen any tea, but then he notices the girl Yuri holding a cup of tea that she made specially for him. Ein is hesitant to drink mysterious tea that could potentially contain some body fluid, but Ursula forces it down his throat anyway, so it's not like he had much of a choice. However, it turns out that the tea actually tastes really good, so Ein tells Yuri as much, and she's really glad he likes it. Ein thinks Yuri looks really cute when she's happy, but Ursula warns him that she'll erase his entire existence if he has even a single lewd thought about Yuri. Ein gets the message, so moving on, he asks if it was the two of them who saved him from the death bear. Ursula tells him she had no interest in protecting a smelly human like him, but Yuri kept begging her to save him, so she had no choice. Ein thanks Yuri for caring about him, and Yuri gets a little embarrassed, so Ursula drop-kicks him in the face and starts stomping him out for flirting with her daughter. Ein is shocked to hear that Ursula is Yuri's mother, but to be more precise, Ursula is actually Yuri's guardian, and it's been that way ever since she first planted her roots here. Yuri may look human, but she's actually this world tree, one of 9 that exist in this world, so Ursula was tasked with watching over her and defending Yuri against any potential threats. Ein is surprised to learn that Yuri is the world tree spirit, but it makes sense to him since she's so beautiful. But immediately after he says that, Yuri gets embarrassed again, so Ursula kicks him to the ground for daring to look at Yuri with such lecherous eyes. Ein apologizes, but speaking of eyes, he realizes that he can still see despite getting one of his eyeballs torn out by the death bear. Ursula explains that she healed him using the tears of the world tree, but even with the healing ability of the tears, they still can't restore a crushed eyeball, so Yuri generously asked her to use part of the world tree to make a new eye for him so he could see. Ein is once again really thankful, but he's starting to wonder why Yuri was so concerned about him in the first place when they barely know each other. She tells him it's because he thanked her when he fell down here. It's rare for people to end up here, but there have still been a handful of incidents of people falling to their doom, and Yuri would always save them, but they would never thank her. And as soon as those people realized that she was the world tree, they would selfishly begin collecting her water and even tearing off Yuri's branches and leaves so they could sell them for profit. However, Ein was the first person to treat her with respect, so she took a liking to him. But be that as it may, Ein isn't supposed to be here, so Ursula tells him to hurry up and leave. Yuri pleads with Ursula not to kick Ein out since he's bound to die if he heads back into the dungeon, but Ursula doesn't care what happens to him. Yuri does care though, so she pleads with Ursula to at least find a way to guarantee that Ein can make it home safe and sound. However, there really isn't much Ursula can do to help him. Since she is the world tree's guardian, she isn't allowed to get too far from the tree, so escorting Ein to the surface isn't really an option. And teleportation magic doesn't work in this dungeon, so she can't use that either. Yuri is devastated that there's no way to keep Ein alive, so she breaks down in tears, but Ursula can't stand to see her cry, so she comes up with an alternative to make sure Ein makes it home safely. She turns to him and yells that she will personally train him until he is strong enough to make it out of here on his own. Yuri thanks Ursula for agreeing to help, and Ein is even more thankful, since he had thought he was going to die here for sure. He hugs both Ursula and Yuri, but Ursula doesn't like all this affection, so she pulls him away and warns him that he's about to receive hellish training from one of the world's greatest sages, so he had better take this seriously since she won't tolerate laziness. Ein understands and swears that he will do his best, but when Ursula leaves him outside so they can begin their training, Ein starts to worry that she might just force him to fight monsters on his own. Just then, Ursula informs him that she indeed expects him to fight monsters on his own because that's the quickest way for him to learn. To start off, she says she wants him to fight that gremlin way over there, but Light can't actually see anything in that direction. Ursula reminds him that his eye has been replaced with a piece of the world tree, so he should try making use of it a little. But even with his tree spirit eye, Ein still can't see shit. Ursula tells him he just lacks the awareness of what his spirit eye is truly capable of, so Ein takes a moment to think about how he lost his eye, and how Yuri helped him restore it. And by the time he opens his eyes, everything seems a lot brighter. Now that Ein can finally see clearly, Ursula says it's time for them to begin his training, so she tosses a rock at a nearby gremlin, and tells Ein that his first task will be to learn how to dodge the gremlin's high-speed attacks. Ein doesn't think that's possible since the gremlin is moving way too fast for him to keep track of, but Ursula tells him he just needs to use his appraisal skill to scan the gremlin's movements. Ein doesn't think it works that way, but he doesn't have many options, so he tries it out, and to his surprise, he really can see the gremlin's moves now. Although it's pointless if he forgets to dodge. Since Ein is injured, Ursula puts up a barrier and pulls out a bottle of tree drops she borrowed from Yuri. She pours it on Ein's severed ear, and after it has been reattached, she tells him that he had better take this seriously, otherwise he's going to keep getting sliced up. She then drops the barrier and the gremlin attacks him again, but since he knows where it's going to attack, he manages to duck out of the way in time. After a week of constant training, Ein has finally gotten the hang of appraising the gremlin's moves and can dodge its attack every single time. He proudly tells Ursula that he has mastered the technique, but in the process he lets his guard down, so the gremlin is able to sneak up from behind and slashes his back. Ursula creates a shield around the two of them so they can take a break, and she gets a good laugh from seeing Ein's pain. But she admits that he did do a good job at dodging, so she says he has passed the first test. Now they'll move on to the next lesson. So she tells Ein that he has to defeat that gremlin. Ein is willing to try, but he doesn't have a combat job, so killing an S-rank monster will be impossible for him. Ursula already thought of that, and while it certainly would be impossible for Ein if he were fighting with his bare hands, he doesn't have to since Ursula made a special sword for him. Ursula didn't want to make this for him, but Yuri went through all the trouble of snapping off one of her branches because she wanted to help him. Ein is deeply touched that Yuri would put herself through such pain just to help him, so he is really grateful and swears to make good use of it. Ursula undoes the barrier and leaves Ein to face the gremlin, but when he tries to strike at it, the gremlin easily dodges him. Ursula jokes that he's never going to hit the gremlin if he swings so slowly, and Ein is aware of that, so he decides to just predict the gremlin's path and attack it when it gets close to him. However, when he tries to do that, the gremlin just jumps over him because it's not stupid. If it sees Ein try to attack it, it's obviously going to try to dodge, so Ein needs to think of a new strategy. Instead of simply appraising the gremlin's movements to predict its attacks, Ein needs to appraise every facet of the attack itself, so he digs deep and performs a super appraisal as the gremlin charges at him. As he does this, the gremlin seems to freeze in time, but in reality, Ein is just seeing it move in slow motion since his eye is appraising it at such a high speed. And with such a clear view of the gremlin's movements, Ein is easily able to prepare himself and whack it in the face, finally defeating it. Ein is really happy that he just defeated his first monster, but Ursula reminds him that now isn't the time to be celebrating since he's just getting started. For the next part of their training, she tells Ein that he has to defeat over a dozen more gremlins, and Ein is confident that he can handle it, so he gets right to work. After several hours of fighting, Ein is finally done taking out all the gremlins, so he turns to Ursula, expecting to be praised, but she says this much should be normal for someone who can harness the power of the world tree. With that said, Ein has been making steady progress so far, so she thinks he is ready for the next step. She tells him to appraise the gremlin's ability and make it his own, but Ein doesn't understand what she means since appraisal only shows him information about skills. Ursula points out that humans learn skills through constant practice and with his spirit eye. Ein should be able to see not only the information of the skill, but also receive all the experience that comes with it. With this method, it is possible for him to learn a skill instantly, so he decides to try it out and appraises the gremlin's skills. Just then, Ein gets a massive headache as a ton of information rushes into his head all at once. He falls to his knees in pain, but once the headache finally subsides, he acquires the gremlin's high-speed movement skill. He still finds it hard to believe that he learned a skill so quickly, so he decides to test it a little and takes off running down the dungeon hall. Ein is amazed by how fast he's moving since he's way quicker than he used to be, but there's just one problem. His body isn't used to running at this speed, so after a few seconds, every muscle fiber in his body is way torn to pieces. Ursula catches up to him and pours some of the teardrops to heal Ein's broken body. If his body can't handle all that force right now, then he's just going to have to keep practicing until he eventually adapts. Ein's muscle fibers keep tearing each time he runs, but thanks to the tears, Ursula just keeps healing him over and over, until at one point his muscles stop breaking altogether. He now has a strong body and an acceleration skill, so Ein wonders if he might be strong enough to challenge the Death Bear as he is now, but Ursula tells him he'd still get demolished if he tried to pick a fight with it as he is now. He may be faster and nimble, but he still lacks the necessary attack power, so Ursula decides to let him copy one of her own abilities. Ein is excited to hear this, so he asks Ursula what her ability is, and she demonstrates by immediately blasting him with a fireball. Ursula's ability is called Discard Enchant, and it allows her to use magic without needing to spend time on a chant. Ein thinks that ability is super strong, so he can't wait to learn it, but Ursula will only allow him to appraise it if he does it while she launches a fireball at him because she thinks it's fun. Ein appraises the attack and manages to learn the Discard Enchantment spell, but then Ursula hits him with the fireball, so he falls to the ground in agony. After being healed yet again, Ein begins training to learn how to use magic without incantations, but since he doesn't have a magic-oriented class, his mana reserves are abysmally low, so he runs out of magic energy really quickly. Fortunately, whenever he is healed with the tears, it replenishes his mana and simultaneously increases his magic capacity a little, but he's going to have to keep practicing for a long time if he ever wants to master the technique. After half a month of magic training, Ein has learned how to cast mid-level magic and is now capable of shooting more than 1,000 fireballs simultaneously. With this combined with his new skills and buffed appraisal ability, Ursula thinks Ein is finally ready to face another death bear. In all honesty, Ein is a little nervous about facing such a powerful monster on his own, but Ursula assures him that if he uses all the techniques she taught him, then he should easily be able to handle it. As Ein confronts the bear tries to slash in with its claws, but Ein appraises its movements, and before it could hit him, he counters with the point-blank wing cutter spell. The spell does a lot of damage to the bear, but it ultimately isn't enough to kill it, so Ein begins firing fireballs, and he keeps going until the bear falls over dead. That fight was way easier than Ein thought it would be, so he starts wondering if the bear was always this weak, but in reality, he just became really strong. This is the end of episode 2. Subscribe to not miss the next part.